The expensive crystal glass smashed against the dark wood floor, splashing crimson liquid across the surface like an open artery. But the broken glass wasn't the real insult. It was the wine currently stinging my eyes, soaking into my scalp, and ruining my tailored white shirt. My father-in-law, Arthur Sterling, stood at the head of the table, his hand empty and his gaze filled with pure arrogance. My wife's sister, Chloe, was doubled over with laughter, pointing at me. "Nice shot, Dad." Chloe choked out between fits of giggles. Maybe that pig will finally learn where he fits in this family. Disgusting loser. I felt my fingers tighten around the edge of my seat. The entire Sterling clan was staring. My wife Alina sat perfectly still next to me, her expression blank. Her mother Eleanor covered her mouth, though I couldn't tell if she was hiding a gasp or a smirk. Her brother Julian kept his eyes glued to his plate, looking for an exit. And Arthur? He stood there with his chest out, looking like a king who had just vanquished a peasant. I stood up without a word. The room fell silent, the only sound being Chloe's dying laughter. I reached into my coat and pulled out my smartphone. My hands didn't shake despite the fury burning in my chest. I found a contact I had saved for an emergency and hit dial. "Miller," I said as soon as he picked up, "it is time. Launch everything we prepared." I ended the call. The dining room was hauntingly quiet now. Even Chloe stopped smiling. Had no clue who I really was. They didn't understand the empire I had built in the shadows, the strings I pulled, or exactly how much I was about to strip away from them. But they were about to get a very expensive education. My name is Elias Thorne. I am 42 years old, and before that disastrous holiday dinner, most people saw me as a boring, quiet guy who worked in the back office of a finance firm. What they failed to realize is that being quiet doesn't mean you are weak, and being humble doesn't mean you lack teeth. I had spent 15 years building a fortune far beyond the Sterling family's imagination. And for the last 6 months, I had been sharpening the blade for this exact moment. If you are hooked on this story and want to see the downfall of the Sterlings, hit that subscribe button right now. Tell me in the comments what you would have done if someone threw wine in your face. And don't forget to like this video, because things are about to get incredibly intense. The Sterlings never gave me an ounce of respect. Not since I married Elena 8 years ago. To them, I was the outsider who didn't have the right last name or the right inheritance. I didn't fit into their world of high-stakes galas and private clubs. Arthur had made his money in commercial construction during the 80s, buying low and selling high. He thought he was a self-made titan, which made his hatred for me even more hypocritical. Elias does something in finance. He would tell guests at parties, making the word sound like a synonym for garbage collector. Some kind of middle management investment stuff. I don't really pay attention to it. The reality was that Arthur knew exactly what I did. He just hated that I had surpassed his wealth without ever asking for his help. I operated a private equity firm that specialized in higher-risk assets failing office buildings, bankrupt corporations, and developments in deep trouble. I bought them for a fraction of their value, fixed the rot, and sold them for massive returns. My firm was managing over $300 million, and my personal wealth was close to $70 million. But the Sterlings were oblivious. To them, I was just Elias, the guy who nodded at Arthur's boring stories and never talked back. Alina knew the truth. She saw our accounts and signed the tax forms, but she never bothered to correct her family's insults. That should have been my first red flag. The disrespect started with small things. Arthur would mock my wardrobe at dinners. "Elias, is that suit off the rack?" Julian would talk about his prestigious law firm as if my career was a hobby. Eleanor would constantly ask when we were moving out of our 4-bedroom house into a real mansion, and Chloe was the worst. She married a guy named Grant, a hedge fund manager who bragged about his bonuses every chance he got. "Grant's firm is looking at 30% growth this year," Chloe would say, staring me down. "What kind of pennies is your little fund making, Elias?" I would just smile and change the subject. Why correct them? My fund had averaged 42% returns for 10 years, but facts didn't matter to people who lived in their own fairy tales. Alina was different when we met. She worked as an independent gallery curator, driven and hungry to make it on her own. I loved her strength and her sharp mind, but slowly, over time, the sterling gravity pulled her back in. She started spending more time with her family, adopting their cold attitudes and looking at me with that same pitying gaze they used. 6 months ago, the shift became obvious. Elena started taking private calls in the middle of the night. She was gone until dawn for book clubs. She was constantly at the salon and buying expensive jewelry. I wasn't naive. I did what any businessman would do. I gathered intelligence. I hired Vance, a former intelligence officer who ran a high-end pie firm. Within 2 weeks, I had the files. Lena was sleeping with Marcus Drax, a flashy gallery owner who had been sniffing around her for a year. They met at his penthouse several times a week. Their text messages were brutal. "Elias is a ghost," one message said. "He just sits there with his little calculators and his pathetic life." Another one hit harder. "He is exactly what my father called him. A nobody trying to play with the big boys." I sat in my dark office reading those words, feeling a cold clarity wash over me. The woman I loved was a fiction. All that was left was a sterling who thought she had married beneath her. That was when the plan began. Arthur's empire was a house of cards. I knew this because I had been analyzing his holdings for years, not as a son-in-law but as a predator. I looked for weaknesses, and Arthur's portfolio was a mess. He had 12 major buildings. 3 had massive loans coming due that he couldn't afford to pay. 2 were half empty and losing money every day. And his crown jewel, Sterling Plaza, was about to lose its primary tenant in 6 months. I spent months moving my pieces. I contacted Arthur's biggest tenant through a shell company and offered them a better deal in one of my buildings. Signed the move-out papers immediately. I reached out to the banks holding Arthur's debt and offered to buy his distressed loans at a discount if he missed a payment. I also started digging into the rest of the family. Julian's law firm was drowning because he was a lazy lawyer and his clients were fed up. I documented it all. Chloe's husband, Grant, was a fraud. His hedge fund was losing money and investors were fleeing in secret. Even Eleanor had a secret. She had been draining Arthur's accounts to fund a gambling addiction that would bankrupt a small nation. By the time that holiday dinner arrived, I had the detonator in my hand. The night started as it always did. We arrived at the Sterling mansion at 6 p.m. The house was decorated with that sterile, expensive taste that money buys when you have no soul. Arthur led the conversation, boasting about a new retail center he bought that he claimed would change the city. Julian lied about his legal wins. Chloe and Grant talked about their private jet trip to the Alps. I sat there, eating my meal and playing the part of the quiet husband. "Elias," Arthur said halfway through dinner, "I heard your little company tried to buy a warehouse from Frank Miller last week." I looked up. "We make many offers, Arthur." I'd have to check my notes. "The industrial park on the east side," Arthur continued. "Frank said your offer was 30% below market?" He felt insulted. I replied calmly, "We offer what the math supports. If he thinks it's worth more, he can try to find another buyer." "That's the problem with you kids," Arthur barked. "No respect for the old ways. Business is about handshakes and history, not just numbers on a screen." "I prefer to let the numbers speak," I said. Arthur's face turned a deep red. "Numbers don't mean anything if you don't have a name, Elias. Frank and I have been friends for 30 years. There's value in that loyalty that your little computer can't understand." I didn't tell him that Frank was 4 months behind on his payments and was about to lose everything to me. I just went back to my steak. Then Chloe chimed in. "Elias doesn't know how the world works, Dad. Grant says funds like his are just parasites." Grant looked embarrassed, but Chloe loved making him sound like a genius. "We provide capital to companies that are dying," I said. "We save them." "You provide exploitation," Chloe snapped, fueled by wine. "You steal from desperate people." "Not business. That's theft." Lena touched my arm, signaling me to be quiet. I looked at her and wondered if she gave her lover that same look of disappointment. Arthur wasn't done. "No, let's hear it. Help me understand how being a vulture is noble, Elias." I put my fork down. "Would you rather those buildings stay empty and the employees lose their jobs?" It's because that's what happens when you don't adapt. I create value where there is only rot. You create value for yourself, Arthur yelled. Don't act like it's charity. I never said it was charity, I replied. It's business. Which is more than I can say for holding on to buildings that are bleeding money just because you're too proud to admit you're failing. The room went icy. I had insulted the king. Arthur stood up, his face trembling with rage. How dare you insult me in my own home? I'm not insulting you, I said. I'm telling you the truth. The 80s are over. Adapt or drown. Get out, Arthur roared. Get out of my sight. That's when Alina made her choice. She looked at me with cold, disgusted eyes and said, Elias, maybe you should just go. Not Dad. Stop. Not let's talk. Just go. As if I was the intruder, I stood up, but I didn't go to the door. I walked toward Arthur. He grabbed his glass and threw the red wine straight into my face. It was cold and stinging. Chloe laughed. That wicked, sharp laugh. Nice shot, Dad. Maybe that pig will learn some respect, a filthy animal. The rage was there, but the calculation was stronger. I pulled out my phone. Miller, I said. It is time. Execute. Malcolm Miller was my lawyer, the best in the business. We had been ready for months. Elias, what are you doing? Lena asked her, voice finally showing a hint of fear. I'm done, I said. I'm done with the insults, the mockery, and I'm done with you. What does that mean? Arthur demanded. Who was that on the phone? My attorney, I replied. I'm filing for divorce tonight. Alina, expect to be served in the morning. And Arthur, I'm suing you for assault. I've been recording this entire dinner since I stood up. I showed him my phone. The recording light was blinking. You can't do that, Chloe screamed. Actually, in this state, I can, I said. Miller is. Also freezing every joint asset I have with Alina and Arthur. He's initiating foreclosure on 3 of your properties. Arthur's face went white. You don't own my properties. No, I said. But I bought your debt from the banks 3 months ago. You're 60 days late on 2 loans and 30 on the 3rd. I'm calling the notes due. Now. The room exploded. Julie and I continued, your biggest client just fired your firm. I bought his building yesterday, and he's moving his legal work to someone who actually knows the law. Chloe asked Grant about his hedge fund. He's lost 40% of his capital this quarter, and his investors are suing. And Eleanor? Maybe ask Arthur about the second mortgage he took out on this house to pay off your casino debts. That loan is due in 6 months, and with his business failing, you'll be looking for an apartment soon. You're a monster, Elena whispered. I looked at Hertha, the woman who cheated and laughed behind my back. No, I said. I'm just someone who is tired of being treated like nothing by people who are actually nothing. I walked out, wine still dripping from my chin. Happy New Year, I said at the door. Hope you get exactly what you deserve. The next few days were a massacre. Miller worked like a machine. Lena got the divorce papers on January 1st. Arthur got the foreclosure notices on the 2nd. Julian lost his clients on the 3rd. My phone was blowing up. Lena called dozens of times, switching from screaming to begging. Julian tried to negotiate. Lena cried into my voicemail. I'd ignored them all. The pie report went to my lawyer, and in this state, adultery matters. Elena wasn't going to get half of my $70 million. She'd be lucky to keep her car. Arthur's empire collapsed. Once the word got out that he was in foreclosure, his other banks panicked. His tenants left. His reputation was ruined. I felt no joy, only the satisfaction of a job well done. A week later, I finally picked up Elena's call. Elias, please, she sobbed. You're destroying my family. No, Elena, I said. I'm holding them accountable. Your father has treated me like trash for 8 years. Those weren't accidents. They were choices. Now he has to live with them. What about us? She asked. I almost laughed. You mean the us where you've been sleeping with Marcus for 6 months? The us where you laughed about how clueless I am in your texts? Silence. I know about Marcus, I said. I've known for months. I have the photos. Don't talk to me about our marriage. Elias, I'm sorry. It was a mistake. Marcus is nothing. Then you threw away your life for nothing, I replied. Why didn't you ever defend me, Alina? Why didn't you ever tell Chloe to shut up? Because deep down you thought they were right. You thought I wasn't good enough. Well, look at me now. The legal battles took months. Arthur lost Sterling Plaza. I bought it at the auction and sold it to a group that actually wanted to fix it. Julian's firm barely survived. Grant's fund collapsed and Chloe divorced him 6 months later because he wasn't rich anymore. Typical. Sterling. Eleanor had to move into a tiny house after Arthur lost the mansion. The divorce was finalized after 8 months. Lena tried to fight for more, but the adultery evidence and my premarital asset protection crushed her. She walked away with $200,000. For a woman who expected tens of millions, it was a death sentence. I saw her at the courthouse one last time. She looked small. I walked right past her without saying a word. A year later, I was in my new office. Looking at the city, my fund was now managing $400 million. My assistant knocked. "Mr. Thorne, there is an Amanda Vance here to see you. She's from the art museum." "Send her in," I said. Amanda was brilliant, sharp, and totally unimpressed by my bank account. She wanted a donation for a new wing, and she was direct about it. I liked her immediately. We talked for an hour about art in the city. I gave her $5 million, and then I asked her to dinner. She said yes. The Sterlings became a distant memory. Arthur ended up working as a property manager for someone else. Julian is still a mediocre lawyer. Helena moved to the coast to try and rebuild her life. I wish her well, in the way you wish well for a stranger you used to know. Amanda and I have been together for a year now. She's independent and loves me for who I am. It's not what I can buy her. 2 years after that wine was thrown in my face, we hosted a party at my penthouse. At midnight, Amanda took me to the balcony. "I love that you know your worth," she said. "Don't need anyone to tell you you're successful. You just are." I looked out at the lights. "I had to learn that the hard way," I said. "The best lessons are," she replied. I realized then that the Sterlings didn't teach me a lesson, they'd freed me. Being good enough for the wrong people is a prison. I built my life on my terms. That wine in my face was the wake-up call I needed. To realize I deserved better. The best revenge isn't destruction. It's building a life so magnificent that their insults can't even reach you. Arthur thought he was putting me in my place. He actually set me free. And for that, I should probably thank him. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on new interesting stories about revenge.